How's it going, everybody? All right, I have a deep dive today into an issue of muscle and fitness from April 2001. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I haven't done a muscle and fitness in a while, but before that, I need to show you guys something real quick. I've been seeing these thumbnails for videos about building huge glutes, uh, grow your glutes, and in this simple glute routine, or with this simple glute routine, or grow your glutes quick, get huge glutes, get your glutes to grow videos. I've been seeing a lot of them, in all kinds of permutations, and I want to show you guys something real quick. All right, I had a girlfriend once who had the flattest ass I had ever seen in my life. This is actually, the reason we broke up. I just couldn't handle dealing with somebody with such a flat ass, ridiculously flat ass, horrible looking ass. And this is what it looked like. No disrespect to her. I'm not going to say her name, but all right, here's her lower back. That's the lower back. And not a perfectly drawn lower back, but this is her lower back. And then from there, this is her ass. All right, that's her ass, and that's her lower back. All right, her ass went in. Okay, so she had negative ass. This is negative ass. Like, this is your lower back, and your ass goes in and begins to form. Now, a desirable ass, or posterior, a desirable posterior looks like this. Here's the lower back, and the posterior, the glutes come out like that. That's probably the most desirable ass, just in general. All right, and then you have some asses, or posteriors. I need to remember I'm a professional here. You have some posteriors that look like this. Here's the lower back, and then the posterior forms from there. So there's the lower back, and then there's the ass, the posterior. It doesn't come out like this one, and it doesn't go in like this one, but it just pretty much stays in line with the lower back. All right, that is probably what you would consider a person with no ass. Okay, now, as far as building huge glutes, my ex-girlfriend had negative ass. All right, her ass was so freaking non-existent that she could grow some ass from here, and she still have no ass. Okay, she could literally grow some ass, and then the end result is no ass like this. Now, back to the huge glute thing. All right, this is a person who has a long, full, round muscle belly, perhaps with a larger cross-sectional fiber area, favorable tendon attachments, maybe in perhaps a high percentage of fast twitch muscle fibers. So, those are all the reasons, why the glute could be developed like this. This person here, my ex-girlfriend, has a very short muscle belly, perhaps not very favorable tendon attachments, not a very favorable tendon attachment, high percentage of slow twitch muscle fibers, and a smaller cross-sectional fiber area. So this is why her posterior looked like this. It went in from the lower back. And of course, this is a small, rather short muscle belly. Not as bad as this, but not as good as this. Short muscle belly, probably not so favorable of a tendon attachment, high percentage of slow twitch muscle fibers, and a smaller cross-sectional fiber area. Okay, so you cannot make someone have glutes like this if they have the genetic disposition of this or this. Okay, especially if they have negative ass like my ex-girlfriend. All right, that's the worst. And I've seen this in real life. You know, she would have loved to have this, trust me. But genetics, there's just nothing she could have done. So when you see these videos where they tell you that they can give you this, it's bullshit. You have to have the genetic predisposition. All right, you have to have the length, the proper length muscle belly, the proper size cross-sectional fiber areas, a higher percentage of fast twitch muscle fibers, a favorable tendon attachment, which gives you a mechanical advantage in functionality. All right, if you have this or this, you aren't going to have big glutes. It's just genetic. It's just genetic. So they're just trying to clickbait you guys. And I just wanted to point that out with a diagram. All right, you can't just build huge glutes without genetics or anything. And I could say the same thing about any body part. I just was talking about glutes there. All right, but in any body part, same story. You know, the muscle bellies have to be there. The fiber type, cross-sectional fiber area, tendon attachment, percentage of muscle fibers, if I didn't already say that. So, you know, has to be there. All right, muscle and fitness. And when I say at the end of my videos that I'll be back with more information on the fitness industry, personal training, and strength training in general, I mean that literally. You know, and I like to give you guys insight into the real fitness industry beyond just, you know, all the misinformation you get on YouTube and on the internet in general, you know, from someone who really works and really has made a career in that industry and been to school for it. That's the whole point of this channel, you know. And I want to kind of turn you on to how like some legitimate professionals talk. You know, some of the ways that we look at strength training versus the ways that, you know, your general uneducated fitness enthusiast may look at it. It's like vastly different. And one thing I wanted to talk about is, and these are my words that I'm about to say. Other legitimate trainers may say this differently, you know, and some of them may even have a slightly different opinion, but I don't know how many legit professionals can disagree with me on this. But there are a lot of great reasons for lifting weights. Okay, there are a multitude of great reasons for strength training. You know, the increase of bone density, the improvement of neuromuscular activation, or just the improvement of your nervous system in general. It increases and improves your basal metabolic rate. It improves your strength to weight ratio. Of course, improves your body mass index. It's great for your posture. Great for correcting issues, which brings me to my point in general, correcting issues. Well, I believe that out of all of those reasons and any other reasons that you may come up with, like, you know, building the size of your muscles, I know that's really important to a lot of people, is getting bigger, getting jacked, getting ripped. That's probably most important to most people. But the number one benefit, or the number one reason to strength train in general, is because weight training acts as a physiological system of checks and balances, similar to that of the United States government. Now, those of us who are American, you know, we should know at least a little bit about how our government works, at least unless you didn't pay attention in civics class. But most of us know that our government has three branches, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And it operates under a system of checks and balances that's there to make sure that no one particular branch becomes too powerful. That way we don't end up living in a quasi dictatorship. Okay, that's what the system of checks and balances is all about. Basically, keeping all branches of power equal so that no one is dominant. Very simple. And people who strength train don't realize that strength training is the same thing, except for the human body. It's a physiological system of checks and balances, as I said before, because muscular imbalances are probably, the number one reason why people have pain, why people end up having chronic pain at some point in their life, shoulder issues, low back issues, hip issues. I would imagine that the most common reason is some type of muscular imbalance. Okay. And strength training is a system of checks and balances, that should make sure that no one particular muscle or one particular muscle group is dominating the opposing muscle group. Okay, now a real common example of this is chest versus back. It's very common for people to have dominant chests and anterior delts as opposed to the opposing muscle group, which is the upper back and posterior delts. Okay, that's very common. Okay, and what happens if you're dealing with this is you end up in a perpetual state of scapular protraction. All right. That's pretty much what that means. You're in a perpetual state of scapular protraction. And that is just a fancy way of saying that you slouch. Okay, it's because the anterior musculature, the chest and anterior delts, are dominating the upper back and the posterior delts. So that's probably the most common case of muscular imbalance. Okay, and then from there, you could say the anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, the anterior pelvic tilt is based on the fact that your lower back, glutes, and hamstrings are pretty much dominating your hip flexors, quads, and rectus abdominis. Okay, and the opposite of that would be the posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, and that means that your quads, hip flexors, perhaps your rectus abdominis is dominating your lower back, glutes, and hamstrings. Okay, and those are two examples of muscle groups that have an imbalance. And when it comes to muscle groups, it's going to end up dominating the opposing muscle group, which essentially just pulls your skeletal structure out of whack. All right, for all intents and purposes, that's what happens. Okay, I don't know. I'm in my early 50s. I don't know how many of you remember 70s and 80s NFL football, but there tended to be a lot of torn hamstrings. It was super common. Torn hamstrings, the torn hamstring, a pulled hamstring, and of course, knee problems were rampant, and a lot of that was because the training tended to be very quad intensive. They really focused a lot more on the quadriceps, and this is, rudimentary strength training, because this science has continued to evolve. And at one point, the muscles of the posterior chain, the back muscles, the glutes, the hamstrings, the calves, the lower back, people didn't understand that you had to really train them equally. So that's a theory. It's not my theory. It's a theory that I heard from years ago, 20 or so years ago. But, football training, the exercises done used to be, maybe like similar to this, what Ronnie Coleman's doing here. This is quad intensive. All right. And theoretically, you want equality. You want functional equality between every agonist and antagonist muscle group. And that's just another way of saying opposing muscle groups, agonists and antagonists. You theoretically want them, relatively speaking, to have equal power so that one isn't dominant. Another example is when your glute medius is weak. Your glute medius is theoretically an abduction muscle that deals with raising the leg to the side and stabilizing the hip. All right, so say you have a weak gluteus medius. That means that your IT band and maybe your tensor fascia latae is going to end up working harder, because there's one muscle kind of in the chain, in an adjacent muscle that isn't pulling its weight. It's weaker than the others. So the remedy to that is to pinpoint that structural weakness and strengthen it. That is what weight training is for. Number one, that's the number one reason is if you look at it as a system of physiological checks and balances, you can rid yourself of muscular imbalances, so you won't end up with some of the same problems that people end up with as they get older, because based on your own physical proclivities, just your general habits, perhaps, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, it could be anything. It could be the way you sit. Literally, it could be the way you sit. Something that you do is going to cause certain muscles to be stronger, to be dominant. Like I said, it can be anything as simple as the way you sit. Okay, it can cause I knew a man who would always cross his legs when he sat. He would kind of cross his legs like a woman, and that's just how he sat. I've seen plenty of men who sit that way, but he always would sit with his right leg crossed over his left. I used to train him, and he eventually ended up having hip pain. And theoretically, he's always relaxing that right IT band and theoretically stretching it, and depending on how he's sitting or on what type of couch he's sitting on, that opposing IT band could end up contracting, So he has one IT band that's contracting and the next IT band is stretching. And that's how he sits. He'll sit like that for an hour or longer. So you're going to cause some type of muscular imbalance. It could be anything. It can happen to anyone, and that is what strength training is about, is pinpointing it and taking care of it, so that you don't have these imbalances. That way you don't have your skeletal structure being pulled out of whack. Literally, it can change the orientation of your skeletal structure. The most well-known example is, like I said, in my opinion, the most well-known example is the chest versus back issue, where you end up in that, like I said, that perpetual state of scapular protraction. Or again, that's a fancy way of saying slouched, because it ends up with you constantly existing in a state of neck flexion as well. Scapular protraction leads to neck flexion. And that neck flexion is when you tuck your chin into your collarbone. It's when your head is down. The opposite is neck extension. So once you start, spending much of your time, much of your scapular time in a state of protraction, the next thing is going to be neck flexion, and it's inevitable. And that's how you end up with horrible posture, slouching. It's that perpetual state of scapular protraction. That's the most common. And that starts with the anterior muscles being dominant. Literally changes the orientation of your skeletal structure, you know. So for those of you who don't know, you know, this is what legitimate trainers talk about. You know what I mean? This is the type of stuff you're going to hear if you're dealing with a legitimate professional. Okay, so when you're looking at YouTube videos and all they're talking about is bullshit information about how to make your glutes bigger, they aren't professionals. You know, a little legitimate professional, if you come into the gym and you say, hey, I want to make this bigger, it is proper procedure to discuss genetics with that person right then and there. You know, so even if they have great genes and they have full, long muscle bellies with all of the traits, the positive traits that I mentioned before, fast twitch muscle fibers, larger cross-sectional fiber area, all of that stuff. Even if I mean, we can see when a person has that, you know, particularly if we do an evaluation. So even if you have those genetics, we're supposed to tell you, you know, well, look, you do have genetics, you know, but you know, you need to be aware of genetic capacity and how it influences muscle size. You know, even if they have the genes, you're supposed to say, you know, just based on what I see, you have the genetics, you know. But hey, you never know, you know. But for the most part, we can tell by looking. But we're still supposed to tell them, hey, you never know. This stuff is genetically predetermined. You aren't supposed to guarantee that somebody is going to get jacked. It's just not proper procedure. You know what I mean? And especially with somebody that you've never fucking seen. Somebody's watching your video and you're guaranteeing them that you can get them a six-pack. That's snake oil bullshit. That really is fraudulent in nature. It's misinformation. It's stupid. It's totally misguided, and it's wrong. You can't guarantee that, particularly with somebody you've never seen. You know, you have to evaluate them, and then you can determine, well, hey, if he has muscle bellies like this, you know, full muscle bellies. I mean, even if this guy wasn't on the juice and lifting, I could look at him and tell if he has the genetic capacity. You know what I mean? But somebody you've never seen, and you're guaranteeing them huge glutes and you know, huge pecs. It's just bullshit. You know. So in the real fitness industry, we let people know that. You know what I mean? You have to. You know, now there are some trainers, particularly beginners, who may just say, oh yeah, I can do that. I can give you, you know, pot roast pecs like Lou Ferrigno had. Sure, I can do that. Some will kind of break that golden rule and go ahead and just claim that they can do whatever it is they think they can, or that they want you to think they can do. Just tell you whatever. Tell you what you want to hear, whatever. There are some that do that, but they're wrong for it. You know, and it comes back to bite them in the ass. You know, once you and they see that, well, you know what, they don't have the genetics for this. You know. So that's but that whole thing about oh, this is Sean Ray quad. He's talking about how he built his quads. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this is another case of it. You know, the way that Sean Ray's quads flared out. You know, they had this I believe it's called a sweep to them. I mean, they flared out like crazy. Like nobody had that type of leg development where they just flared out as much as he did. Like from the side, his quads just completely came out. More so, even toward the bottom, you know, it was like a ledge. You know what I mean? It didn't taper down. Whole freaking quad just poof, stuck out. You know, and that has nothing to do with the exercises he chose or, you know, like, yeah, like here's a good example. That quad development was phenomenal. The way they stuck out, You know, those are just huge muscle bellies that he was born with, you know, and that's it doesn't have as much to do with anything, you know, the choices of exercises, the intensity, blah, blah, blah. You know, they would have been shaped that way to some extent or another, regardless. You know, that's how genetics works. And, man, you know what? This freaking, you know what? I'm not gonna, there's not enough. What the hell is this? This is a poster I never took out. Oh, just looks like some female bodybuilder. There's not enough left for me to make this into 2. So I'm going to go through this real quick, and I'm going to hold up any pictures that you may want to see. I don't know who this guy is. I don't remember this guy. But yeah, that was an example today of what we really talk about. You know, and unfortunately, these aspects aren't talked about enough, in my opinion. You know, people should be taught to look at strength training as a physiological system of checks and balances, you know, and that way you'll be much more likely to focus on eliminating those imbalances and not creating them. You know, and unfortunately, with bodybuilding, you end up creating more muscular balances than eliminating them. You know, and the reason is because you're focused so much on what you see, and, you know, you want each muscle to visibly not overpower another muscle. But functionally, the system of checks and balances, we're not talking about visual overpowering. We're talking about functional overpowering. You know, we don't want you to have dictatorships going on in your body, you know, where your chest completely dictates what happens with your entire scapula. You know, it's supposed to be a checks and balances between chest and back. Checks and balances between the chest and back. Pardon me. But if you're completely honed in on bodybuilding, you're certain to upset that system of checks and balances, unfortunately. It's just how it is. You're definitely going to upset that system, you know, because if your shoulders, you know, aren't growing and you're just hammering them, and you're hammering them way more than you hammer the adjacent muscles, you know, there's going to be some type of imbalance, you know, at least in terms of neuromuscular activation, you know, without question. Maybe not a visual imbalance, you know, but there's going to be a physiological, functional imbalance. And bodybuilders create them all the time. If you're not creating some type of imbalance, then you aren't bodybuilding. I mean, unless you're just fortunate enough to have no lagging body parts. But if you have lagging body parts, you're going to train it like crazy. You understand? Everybody knows that. You're going to prioritize it. You know, the way Lee Haney and Dorian Yates prioritize their biceps. Lee Haney and Dorian Yates both had weaker biceps. You know, as a matter of fact, I think when Lee Haney lost to Samir Bannout in 1983, the knock on Haney's physique was his biceps were too small. So he hammered the hell out of his biceps, hammered them. You know, same thing with Dorian Yates. Hammered his biceps, trying to make them equal the rest of his otherwise impressive physique. You know, and with Lee Haney, he never did end up with outstanding biceps, you know, but he got them big enough so they didn't bring his physique down. But, you know, his biceps were never particularly impressive. You know, and as far as Dorian Yates, his biceps weren't impressive either. You know, and he ended up tearing one, you know, which made them even less impressive because one of them is freaking torn. You know, there's nothing that's more visually unimpressive than a torn freaking bicep. You know, so That was the end result for him. So and before the actual tear, I'm sure there was some type of tendonitis, and maybe some supinator muscle in the forearm or some pronator muscle in the forearm, that had been affected, by all the extreme bicep work. Now maybe your biceps are overpowering your arms, maybe causing an imbalance between, the upper and lower arm. Maybe there's some imbalance somewhere is being created, So if you can learn to think about it as a system of checks and balances, you'll never have to worry about that, But, the downside to it is, you can't be a bodybuilder thinking that way, because, if you can't handle seeing one body part that maybe could be a little bigger but isn't, then you can't think, then you won't be able to adhere to the system of checks and balances. That's how it is, But remember, hammering a lagging body part doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to improve it, or at least very much. Still genetically predetermined. Like I said, Lee Haney never ended up, with these great biceps, with the high peaks like Robbie Robinson or Arnold Schwarzenegger. He never ended up with those, And Dorian Yates, same thing with him. And as a matter of fact, he tore a bicep. He tore it, So prioritizing a muscle and, contributing to upsetting the system of checks and balances is not necessarily going to solve your problem anyway. You know what I mean? So I think if you're smart, you will learn to look at your strength training regimen as a physiological system of checks and balances, making sure that no one muscle or no one muscle group is dominant over others. That'll make your life much easier. All right. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, it's almost 35 minutes at this point. I will be back with more videos, more information on the fitness industry, personal training, and strength training in general. All right, I'd like to thank you guys for watching PLA Mind and Body Works. See you next time. Bye-bye.